First up is Godzilla 1954. Godzilla starts out at sea where we watch a fishing boat get set ablaze and sink. While we don't see the creature, you certainly feel its presence. The ship is only one of countless casualties to come. We are then introduced to our love interest and main human protagonists in the film, Ogata and Emiko. They have a great dynamic and chemistry on screen. I really enjoyed watching these characters throughout the film. The mystery deepens as fishing boats return to Odo Island with nothing in their nets. One of the older villagers hypothesizes that it was no other than Godzilla. That night, however, would take a turn for the worse as a storm hit the island, so did Godzilla. The Japanese government decides to tap Professor Yamane to lead a team to find this Godzilla. Once on the island, Yamane and his team inevitably find Godzilla and return to Japan with a report. The government then deliberates on how to handle Godzilla. Do they tell the public? Do they keep it a secret? Unfortunately, before a final decision can be made, Godzilla rises out of Tokyo Bay, showing Godzilla was close to the mainland now, and also ruining any chance of keeping his presence under wraps. Emiko visits Dr. Serizawa, who is another great character when he is on screen. He shows Emiko something he has been working on, the oxygen destroyer. He begs Emiko not to tell a soul of his invention for fear it will come into the wrong hands. That night, Godzilla attacks but retreats after leaving a path of destruction. Godzilla back in Tokyo Bay, the military begins to prepare for another attack. They devise a plan to use power lines to shock Godzilla. Godzilla arrives in Tokyo once more with the power lines ineffective and the military not even laying a scratch on him. Godzilla goes on a fairly long rampage, destroying Tokyo district by district. Here we see the special effects really shine, and that's mostly in part to Eiji Tsuburaya, who was a master of special effects. As all hope seems lost, Godzilla is eventually lured back to sea by fighter jets using light bombs. Godzilla goes back into Tokyo Bay, but Tokyo is destroyed. The imagery to show the destruction brings back memories of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Distraught by what she had seen and determined to put an end to this, Emiko tells Ogata about Serizawa's device and they go to convince him to use it. They are at first unsuccessful as he makes a parallel to the atom bomb, saying once it is used, other countries will want one. A news broadcast changes the doctor's mind, but he destroys his work, saying this will be the first and last time the oxygen destroyer will be used. After tracking Godzilla in Tokyo Bay using Geiger counters, the Japanese military finds Godzilla. Ogata goes with Serizawa to use the oxygen destroyer, but is tricked into going back up so he can be with Emiko. There Serizawa is, his creation, and Godzilla stand. He detonates it, turning Tokyo Bay into a graveyard and taking Godzilla with him. As Godzilla dies, our cast watches in horror. Watching him deteriorate on screen is a bittersweet moment. Dr. Yamane, however, says that another Godzilla will return if atomic bombs were continued to be used. What can I say about this movie? It has a great story. The special effects, while not all hold up today, are fantastic for the time. The characters are interesting, and the real star of the show is Godzilla. His final rampage is glorious. The use of the sets, puppets, and suitmation paved the way for so many other movies. This movie also does a great job of delivering a warning about atomic weapons, but is able to keep that fun kaiju film feel. While this film is dark, I would recommend it to anyone, especially first-time Godzilla fans. I would say this movie still holds up today, as well as the message. The fear of nuclear weapons have, if anything, become more prominent in the last few years. I give this movie 5 stars. Only 6 months later, in 1955, a sequel was made, Godzilla Raids Again, where Godzilla would face off against his first foe, Anguirus. Godzilla Raids Again is one of those films you go in wanting to love and come out deflated and wanting more from the film, which the film can't do because of its rushed production cycle. A side effect of the success from the first film, Godzilla, released only 6 months previously in 1954. But this film isn't all bad. As there are some great parts of this movie, it's just a shame there are only a few of them. We start with 2 pilots, Tugioka and Kobayashi, searching for fish for an Osaka-based cannery company. The actor that plays Tugioka is Hiroshi Kozumi, who would later go on to star in other Godzilla films, as well as Mothra. Kobayashi has a plane malfunction, and both are forced to land near a deserted island. There they stumble upon Godzilla, but this Godzilla is duking it out with another beast we would later come to know as Anguirus. Anguirus later on in the franchise would become an ally to the King of the Monsters, but in this movie, he serves as his first foe. The two pilots return back and report on what they had seen. Dr. Yamane flies in from Tokyo, which I think is a really great part of the film because it shows the continuity, and explains that the military can use flares to lead Godzilla away from the city, as it worked in 1954 during the Tokyo attack. And I think this is a really great tactic used by the film in the absence of the oxygen destroyer. Godzilla arrives in Osaka Bay, and the military begins to carry out the plan suggested by Dr. Yamane. It works for a while until some convicts who are trying to flee the police end up creating an explosion, luring Godzilla back towards the city. And like that, 35 minutes in, Godzilla begins his assault on Osaka. Anguirus, however, is not too far behind, and the two battle it out, leaving the city in absolute ruins. Godzilla eventually kills Anguirus, brutally I might add, and then heads back out to sea. And you can clearly tell that the director is trying to keep the same imagery and use the same atomic bomb parallels, but I feel like these all kind of fall flat compared to the last film. This is where the film begins to drag a little bit, but eventually the military begins a search for Godzilla, and Tokioka spots Godzilla heading towards an icy island. Kobayashi soon joins him, and the two try and bomb Godzilla. However, they are unsuccessful, and in the process, Kobayashi dies. But it gives Tokioka an idea that they can bury Godzilla with an avalanche. And that's what the military does. They come back and bury Godzilla, and he would be buried there for 7 years, until Toho produces King Kong vs. Godzilla for their 30th anniversary. While I do enjoy the monster action in this film on a whole is not very memorable for me, and neither are the characters. While I love the destruction and the chaos these monsters cause, there are some points in the film where the monster action just feels very stiff and not natural. I get that this film had a very short production cycle, but this film just gives off a generic kaiju film feel, and Godzilla is just kind of in it, and the plot isn't very captivating. You don't feel that same sense of tension as there was in the first film. Everything just happens. The monsters show up, the cameras often pull away, and you get some forgettable dialogue. I feel like the monsters should have had a bigger focus on the film, as the film is called Godzilla Raids Again, but the set pieces and special effects are fantastic, and when the monsters are locked in duel destroying everything, it's great. There just should have been more of it. I'm giving this film 2 stars. While I would recommend this film to any Godzilla fan, I would probably not recommend this film to anyone just beginning, as I feel this film does not serve as a good introduction. But I would definitely have them circle back around to it, as I feel every G fan should see all the films eventually. For Toho's 30th anniversary, they wanted to do something big to celebrate the occasion. What better way to do that than have King Kong go up against Godzilla? With Godzilla frozen at the end of Godzilla Raids Again, King Kong vs. Godzilla starts out in Japan. Here we're introduced to Pacific Pharmaceuticals advertising supervisor Mr. Tako, who has been failing to raise company profits. Mr. Tako tasks the movie protagonists Sakurai and Faru to lead an expedition to this island. The men arrive on the island, and the natives at first are suspicious of the crew, but Sakurai, Faru, and the interpreter Kano woo them over. This is one of the most hysterical scenes, and it is revealed that the natives actually pray to a monster god named King Kong. We are then taken back to the Bering Sea, where the water temperature is rising, causing the ice to melt. During its investigation, the submarine unknowingly gets trapped in the same iceberg that Godzilla has been imprisoned in since 1955. Godzilla escapes, attacks a military base, and makes his way to the Japanese mainland. With Godzilla now at large again, the media begins to focus all its attention on him. This frustrates Mr. Tako, desperately wanting the crew to return with his monster, King Kong. The crew and the natives on Faroe Island unfortunately come under attack by a giant octopus. King Kong finally makes his appearance and beats the octopus. Kong then indulges himself in the red berry juice and falls asleep. Sakurai and Faru take King Kong back to Japan on a raft tied to the company's boat. Japan goes into another media frenzy with the dying question, who is stronger, Godzilla or King Kong? With King Kong and Godzilla now both at large on the Japanese mainland, the Japanese now have to devise a plan to defeat both of the monsters. King Kong eventually meets up with Godzilla in the Japanese countryside, and they have a small battle. Kong throws a few rocks at Godzilla, but Godzilla overpowers Kong with its atomic ray. This causes Kong to retreat. The military has to then devise different methods to slow or stop Godzilla. They use digging a hole, which he crawls out of, and then they decide to use power lines. This time, the power lines are 1,000,000 volts instead of 50,000 like in the original film. This works against Godzilla, but has the opposite effect on Kong. Kong destroys the power lines and then goes on a small rampage in Tokyo. Kong kidnaps Sakurai's sister Fumiko and climbs the National Diet Building, similar to how he climbs the Empire State Building in his 1933 film. Thanks to Sakurai and Faru's help, the military used red berry juice capsules to knock out Kong. Eventually, it is then decided to transport King Kong to Mount Fuji, Godzilla's current locations, in hopes that they will kill each other. Kong is transported by balloons and is dropped near Godzilla. Here we see a glorious battle. Godzilla seems to have the upper hand when he knocks Kong unconscious, but then a thunderstorm arrives, rejuvenating Kong. He gets back into the action and uses a new electric grasp power. With the tide of the battle turning, Godzilla and Kong fight their way towards a cliff. They tear down Atami Castle and then fall into the sea. King Kong reemerges and heads back home. While we don't see Godzilla on camera, it is again speculated that he has survived. And that he did, as Godzilla would return in 1964's Mothra vs. Godzilla. I love this film. It's campy and cheesy at times, yes, but I love it. The film doesn't take itself too seriously, but it still delivers a great story. The music is also really enjoyable, especially the chant the natives sing to Kong. The characters in this film are a definite step up from the previous film, and I found them to be a lot more funny and interesting. Mr. Taco, for me, is one of my favorite characters in the franchise. I remember always getting excited seeing this movie in Blockbuster. It was so rare for me to get when I was young. King Kong vs. Godzilla is a classic that no G fan should miss. I give this movie 4 out of 5 stars. Thanks to the immense success of King Kong vs. Godzilla, a sequel was quickly put into production, and Mothra vs. Godzilla was born. Here Godzilla faces off against one of Toho's own kaiju creations, Mothra. The success from her initial film in 1961 sparked Toho to pit the two in a crossover battle. Mothra vs. Godzilla is a fight between two of Toho Studios' most popular monsters. Most notably, this film is the last where Godzilla would serve as the villain. Following this film, Godzilla would transition into a hero and defender of Japan. Mothra vs. Godzilla is also considered one of the creative high points in the Godzilla series. The movie's main characters and good guys, Ichiro, Junko, and Professor Shinzuki, are a great trio. Akira Takarada returns as Ichiro, which is great, as well as Hiroshi Kazumi. These characters are interesting, and it's fun watching them when they are all together. This movie does a good job showing how unstoppable Godzilla is and how much of a force of nature he is. In this movie, Godzilla is less campy and more serious and menacing. His design is very imposing. A destructive typhoon washes ashore a mysterious giant egg. Seeing an opportunity to make a profit off this egg, two greedy entrepreneurs, Jiro Torahata and Komeyama, claim the egg as their own. Twin fairies belonging to Mothra appear and beg the men to return the egg. They explain that the egg belongs to Mothra, and that when the egg hatches, the larva inside will damage Japan as they look for food. The men refuse to return the egg and try and kidnap the fairies. The fairies try and persuade the main heroes, Ichiro, Junko, and Shinzuki. After pleading with him again, Torahata still refuses and puts the egg on public display. Godzilla reawakens near Nagoya and goes on a rampage, disrupting Torahata and Komeyama's plans. This leaves Mothra as Japan's last hope. The heroes go to Infant Island to plead with the natives and eventually convince Mothra to rescue Japan. Godzilla seems almost impossible to stop as every military operation fails. Mothra eventually comes to their aid, but the battle is short-lived. Mothra is at the end of her life cycle and Godzilla is able to gain the upper hand. With all hope seeming lost, Godzilla continues his rampage and Mothra dies, passing her life force onto her offspring. The egg eventually hatches and come out two Mothra larvae. Desperate desperate to stop Godzilla, the larvae enter the action and fight Godzilla. The two use teamwork to outwit Godzilla and send him plummeting back into the sea. Due to the incredible success of this film, Godzilla would return later that year, 7 months to be exact, in Ghidorah, the three-headed monster. This movie is pivotal in Godzilla history because we watch Godzilla transform from villain to hero. Mothra vs. Godzilla is a classic Godzilla movie no G fan should miss. I still remember when I first saw this film when I was younger. I also remember not being very fond of it due to Godzilla being thwarted. As I got older, I came around on the film and have come to respect it. I would give this movie 4 out of 5 stars. The sets and effects are fantastic. I mean, like, seriously, look. The story is interesting, especially the monster fights or Godzilla's rampage. The Godzilla suit design is top-notch, certainly one of my favorite Showa-era designs. If you want more information on that suit, check out my Mosu Goji suit video. Lastly, I think the score is memorable and the characters are fun. You root for them the entire story, and the villains get what's deserved.